there is no size fits all. You have to actually want to understand what the concepts of sustainability are and then apply it to your individual, in this case, golf courses.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Failla, and welcome to the Golf Sustainability Podcast. I'm excited about today's episode as my guest is an accomplished author, educator, and biologist, Ron Dodson, principal of the Dodson Group. Ron's also the author of Sustainable Golf Courses, which is a seminal work in my eyes that really serves as the most authoritative roadmap for anyone interested in ensuring the environmental sustainability of their golf course operation. Well, Ron, welcome to the Golf Sustainability Podcast. It's great to have you with us today. Appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to be here too.
Well, listen, let's start, Ron, with a little about you. This is actually, and we've talked numerous times. I actually haven't shared this with you, but previously I started an enterprise called Smart Energy Decisions. And the inspiration for that was in the summer of 2015, I read a book called Creating Climate Wealth, which was by someone who's now in the Department of Energy called Jigar Shah. And it inspired me, and it led to the development of Smart Energy Decisions. I must say, your book, Sustainable Golf Courses, serve very much the same inspiration for me. It's a great book. I think anyone that's interested in the topic should be reading it. And I just want to thank you at the outset for helping to inspire my jumping into golf sustainability through that fine book that you published, which is now close to 20 years ago.
Well, thanks. And I'm glad to find somebody read it.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll get a lot more people to read it. Why don't we start by having you tell us a little about yourself, your journey in golf sustainability, kind of leading up to what you're doing now, Ron.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Indiana, now live in upstate New York, and played golf in high school and also on a scholarship on the college level. So I've been involved in the game of golf for a long time, and I am not near as good as I used to be, but I still enjoy playing. But at the same time, when I was in college, I actually majored in wildlife biology and natural resource management. I was matter of fact, I think I was the only person who was on a golf scholarship that was in that field of studies. And at that time, it didn't really click that maybe there was something that I could do with golf. It was only later, several years later, when I got involved with the Audubon Group up here in New York State and decided that I wanted to spend more time working with people as opposed to yelling and screaming at them and telling them what they were doing wrong, try to work with people. And it was my dad who actually suggested to me that why don't you work with golf courses? They've got a lot of land, they use water, they use pesticides and fertilizer, and the game. And so that's kind of how I got involved with golf here in New York State. It started with skunks on a golf course up in near Glens Falls, New York. And so that's kind of when it started, around 1987, I think, 1988 maybe. But the whole, in a nutshell, my whole career since that time has been focusing on trying to get people where they live, where they work, and where they play more connected with nature and natural resource management, and think about the decisions they're making relative to managing even their homescapes or their business or whatever. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish and still trying to accomplish today, get more people out in nature and enjoying nature, but also realizing that what they do to it has either a positive or negative impact on nature.
That's interesting. So it started with your academic pursuits and then led to tying that into golf course work and the work you did at Audubon. And, which I guess it was during that period in time where you wrote the book. Tell me about how sustainable golf courses came about. What prompted you to write that book, and what was the genesis of it?
Well, there are actually a number of books that came about, and a lot of the reason that came about is because I was involved. I was on the United States Golf Association's Turfgrass and Environmental Research Committee for about 20 years, and visiting a lot of the golf courses. And basically, I was a classroom teacher for a number of years until I left that and went into the conservation field. But so I consider myself an educator. And so one of the things that I realized is that I can't possibly go face to face and visit everybody that I would like to visit and talk to about conservation management. Maybe I need to write a book. So I kept thinking about that. And I was actually approached by somebody with Wiley Publishing to write a book. And so I thought, hey, that's an idea. School teachers have books, so why not? So my first book was managing wildlife habitat on golf courses. So it was specifically to wildlife, creating wildlife habitat, managing wildlife habitat, but on a golf course. The golf sustainability book came later, and it was also published by Wiley, who, as we went through time, it became clear to me, well, I already knew this, but it became clear to others that there was a lot of aspects of managing a golf course other than just wildlife. Water, obviously, that's connected to wildlife, but there's also the whole social and community benefit and all of the other things that come with that. So in the case of the book you're referencing there, I was convinced by somebody, by one of the publishing people, that even though it was called Golf Sustainability, it also focuses on the environment. It says so right on the title, mainly because they thought that people were not ready for in-your-face sustainability book that talked about the social and economic aspects of it. So those two parts of sustainability are not real heavy in that book, but I mentioned them. Which is kind of why I'm working on another book now that is more focused on true sustainability as it relates to golf. Whether anybody will be interested in that, I don't know, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, well, listen, it's what you're saying really resonates with me, because based on my experience in sustainability in other industries, 20 years ago, when you wrote this, it was a very, very different ballgame. And today, the notion of sustainability is much more holistic. It includes the environment, but it includes social, it includes governance. And it's really interesting to see how your journey in sustainability really started with interest in wildlife, and it then expanded to include water conservation, waste, chemicals, insect maintenance, and now social. So I think the next book that has that broader scope just makes a world of sense.
Well, to be honest with you, I always thought that I wanted to focus on, let's just call it conservation, at the community level, because it was at the community level that we could truly make a difference. So in 1982, I started a little project that I called the Community Conservation Network, and I was going to try to actually work with in some way, basically municipalities. And so I went and got myself invited to give speeches to different municipal leader organizations, mayors groups, city planner groups. And I just could not get anyone at that time to understand or want to do that. So I decided, well, okay, if I can't do it at the community level, I'll have to go door to door in a community. And if I get enough doors in a community involved, maybe eventually the whole community will want to get involved. So that's where the cooperative sanctuary system, I called it in the very beginning. It was a system of trying to get different people where they live, work, and play to include conservation in their land management. And then when I started working with golf, I decided, because of my experience and knowledge about the game and the history of the game, what an opportunity for golf facilities
Mhm.
to become leaders in a kind of a new conservation oriented management and position themselves in ways that not only benefits the golf industry and the golf course, but the economic, social, and environmental sustainability of a community. But at the time, in the early 80s, the time wasn't right. And I couldn't get, I remember at one point during the GCSAA annual conference ahead, I organized a dinner at some restaurant for key people with the USGA, the GCSAA, all the acronyms that are involved in the golf industry. We all sat around a big table and we had food and we had drink and we talked. And at the appointed time, I made a pitch to this assembled group that golf should become more engaged at the community level and to put together and promote the idea that golf is way more beneficial than just golf. It creates jobs, it pays taxes, it buys products, they have educational programs, and so forth and so on. But anyway, at the end of my little pitch, everybody just stared at me, and I still remember one person saying, "Ron, we're just golf course people. That is way beyond the scope of anything that we have the capability of doing, and you're asking us to get way outside of our comfort zone." And so I was disappointed, but I said, okay, well, I'll just keep going the way I've been going then. But I think you're missing the boat.
Yeah. Well, look, you were clearly a visionary, and it's interesting to hear how conservation through golf was really an important part of your initial thought process. I think the market today is much more ready, hopefully even receptive, to take action. I like your focus and your thinking about this notion of kind of community focus, because one of my observations, and we've talked about this briefly previously, there's a lot of messaging from the tops of these associations around sustainability related initiatives, be it water conservation, be it creating a more inclusive universe of people that play golf. But you don't see as much as you'd like at the grassroots level. And I think it's that community focus, this notion of a community conservation network or a golf sustainability network, something that's really focused on the grassroots, I think has some potential and has some legs.
I think there's 2 points to maybe consider on that topic. One is, I agree with you, there have been a lot of documents written and summits held and press releases given on the topic of golf sustainability. And I've been involved in several of them. You probably, maybe about I think it was 1999. Uh, we as in the USGA and our environmental committee and the RNA and a whole bunch of guys gathered at Valderrama Golf Club in Spain and wrote over a period of 2 or 3 days what was called the Valderrama Declaration. And the Valderrama Declaration was adopted by the USGA, the RNA, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. It was kind of a broad-based thing. And the press releases were sent out. And I'm not sure that it used the word sustainability, but that's what it was all about.
Right.
So that's, I think I have a copy of it somewhere on my wall. It's probably on several walls, but I don't know whether anybody's actually walking at the grassroots level what we talked about. Another one that I was involved in was at the Asia Pacific Golf Conference and Summit. I can't remember, 2012, I believe. And we wrote another document that was actually adopted by the Sultan of Brunei. I went to Brunei and stood up there on a stage and had this parchment looking thing with the golf sustainability, blah, blah. I have no idea whether anybody knows where that is or if anybody's doing anything about it. So yeah, we've got all this stuff. These people use these words, but it doesn't seem to be coming up from the bottom, but we're talking about it at the top because it sounds good. And then the second point, that was a long-winded first point. The second point is in the golf operation, in the running of a golf course, who is the lead? Who is going to be the lead? Who is the lead person who's going to walk the talk of sustainability on a daily basis? And I don't know what the answer is. I know in my years of working in the golf industry, there's a lot of different people in the boat that all have paddles, but I'm not sure they're all paddling in the same direction, nor do some of them have as nice a paddle as some other people do. So it ends up, the canoe just goes around the circle, or it doesn't go towards a sustainability destination, which is in the future. But so that's the second concern I have. And I think that's partly, if I were to go around today and visit a significant number of places that I've worked with, including Valderrama Golf Club. That was the first certified Audubon cooperative sanctuary in Europe, and other places where I worked. And we hung stuff on the wall and we had all kinds of fun stuff. Would I find someone there who actually knows what we did or what we said or what we planned? And so I think one of the weak parts so far is the lack of talent, on my part anyway, to implant into a place the ethic that goes along with sustainability so that that becomes the business model and the way they run themselves.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing.
Yeah. Well, you've really triggered some thoughts there, kind of tied to my experience in prior industries. And that is, Ron, you're 100% right. Someone's got to own this, because if no one owns it, it's not going to happen. And what I've seen happen in other markets is that what winds up happening is this defined role of sustainability, it evolves and it gets put in place in more and more organizations. And that person owns this topic, this commitment, and they're working with other departments to move the ball forward. What I'm hearing you say ties directly into my observation, which is there are a lot of well-intentioned efforts at the tops of these organizations, but what's lacking is a model, a plan, a methodology to take those good intentions and turn it into grassroots action. And I think that we've already established a theme for this episode and this conversation, Ron, because it's all about inspiring grassroots action. I'd like to jump into some of the key concepts in your first book that I thought were interesting. The first one is you referred to it as no one size fits all, and that's at the outset of the book. Talk to us a little about what you meant about that.
Well, basically, what I was saying then, and I still believe now, is that I have found that maybe it's just human human trait to want to package things up and have a recipe book for whatever the topic is. Go to page 1, now go to page 2, do what's on page 2, now go to page 3, do what's on page 3. And that might be helpful as a workbook, but there's got to be a lot of blanks in it because every golf course is located in different places. The communities they're in need different things. The watersheds that they're in will be different from one place to another. The natural regions that they're in, the economies of those places, the golf industry itself will be different in different places around the country. So if you're going to be economically successful in the golf business, you got to have a sustainable business model plan based on where you're physically located. So anybody that says all you have to do is follow everything that's in that book on your desk right there, and you will be sustainable, didn't read what I first said. There is no size fits all. You have to actually want to understand what the concepts of sustainability are and then apply it to your individual, in this case, golf courses. And that starts with, are you a public golf course or are you a private golf course? Yeah, I mean, that's part of walking the walk of sustainability. You have to walk your own walk.
Right. So, it's interesting, and that ties into another message in the book, which is kind of being sustainable it's not a definitive place. It's not a definitive thing. It's a way, it's a mindset. What are, in the book, you talk about kind of environmental management plans and the importance of environmental management plans for both new courses and existing courses. Talk to me a little bit about the keys of an effective environmental management plan for a new course and then maybe for an old course.
Well, for a new or the way I like to get involved was before they picked their land. Most of the time when I was involved in an Audubon signature project, which was a to be developed project, some development company had already done about 17 pro formas on this property, and they have it tied up, and they've based their economic return on some vision that they have for this property. And then while they were doing this, they also said, oh, by the way, we want to be environmentally friendly, and we're going to be in the Audubon program. And then I'd get called in, and many times I would look at the land and think, how are we going to cram in all those houses that you want to cram in,
right,
and build a golf course that is worth playing and you can maintain it and that makes sense? So I did a lot of preaching on how do you choose the right land to start with. We actually developed a sustainability site selection system that was written up on a piece of paper, and I gave it to people at the Urban Land Institute and other development companies and said, here, look at this, and it'll help you make a decision on things, both from a environmental point of view and therefore from an economic point of view as well. But so anyway, that's kind of where it starts with, is the site selection and then the actual land planning that you do on a site. At an existing place, you have a little bit more of a challenge because, well, it's a little more of a challenge if they did not a great job of picking their land back whenever the thing was built, because you're working with what you have. If you're a private club and you have houses and all that stuff, you're not going to move the houses. You got to work with the place that you have. So a lot of that is connected with infrastructure work, creating opportunities for green infrastructure, for drainage on the golf course, bringing your golf course maintenance facility up to what it ought to be from an environmental management point of view, so you're not storing chemicals in the wrong place and washing your equipment off in a parking lot and letting it run down to the road, and so forth. I mean, opportunities come when you do remodeling. You're going to put in new drainage systems. Well, let's make sure the drains under the greens daylight to no mow zones and not directly to ponds and lakes, and so there's a chance for the water to filter through vegetation before it gets into some water body, and therefore reduce the amount of algae and other growth you might get in your ponds and so forth. So that's the challenge that you have to work with, and so the golf course superintendents are often stuck between a rock and a hard spot. They're brought in to a golf course that may have some architecture issues as it relates to the golf course that causes a lot of hand labor to manage what this golf course architect put in maybe 15 or 20 years ago. So you get that challenge to deal with. Then you have the biggest challenge, which are golfers that think they know more about managing a golf course, particularly turf grass and golf greens, than a trained golf course superintendent does, make their life miserable. And then, of course, if a golf course superintendent can't control the weather, they need to be fired. So there's a lot of things that can be done at existing golf course. But what I've found in my experiences is most green committees at golf courses are really focused more on the social aspect of the club. If it's a private club, I'm talking about a private club. I've always told golf courses, I've told everybody that that most people, most golfers, you never hear from. They come in, they play golf, they go get a beer, they have lunch, they enjoy the go around, they don't play too well, but what the heck, and they go home. There's about 10% or 5%. Well, this is what I'm calling the 595 rule. So 5% of the public, or in this case, your members, are going to agree with everything that you say because they're just agreeable people. They like you. They got good personalities. 5% are going to disagree with everything that you say because they're negative people. They think they know more than you do. And whatever it is you say, they're going to be against it. And 90% of the people, really, they don't have an opinion. They just want to be left alone and enjoy the round and go home. But we tend to want to spend all of our time with that 5% that's agreeable, avoid the 5% that's negative because they're a pain. Mm-hmm. And then we don't think about the 90% in the middle. And I think the secret is to figure out, how do you build a positive relationship with the 90% in the middle who are reasonable people. They aren't negative. They aren't out front positive. They don't show up and gripe at a Greens Committee meeting ever. And to me, that's where the grassroots opportunity is, the 90% in the middle, not the 5% that agree with everything you say. They're not going to help you very much.
Right, right. So it is like a bell curve. You've got the ends, and then you've got the bubble in the
Right.
middle where there's
Yep.
real opportunity. Now, on the dimension related to existing courses, I'm curious, do you have kind of one or two examples of projects that you've seen really go well where an issue was identified and within the context of the existing framework, there was some progress made?
Well, there's been several golf courses, particularly down in Florida. Because I worked a lot with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and we developed a manual for best management practices for golf course maintenance facilities in Florida. And so there's a number of existing golf courses down there that have redeveloped their maintenance. I call it a natural resource management center, where they brought it up to meet the standards that DEP put out as it relates to having a separate building for your chemicals, a proper mixed load facility, good storage and inventory systems in the maintenance facility, and all the things that go with that. So I can't name one right now off the top of my head. There's a number of them, but if you haven't got a copy of that DEP document, you can get it online or get a hard copy and go from there.
Yep. I just made a note to get that because I haven't seen it. You know, it's interesting. The state of Florida, which is my home state, is also the only state, to my knowledge, where the best management practices are that have been established by the Golf Course Superintendents Association are actually required. And
Correct.
I plan on getting connected with that group and talk to some of the local people in Florida that are driving that program.
Yeah. And that right there is an example of what I think one aspect of facilitating the movement towards more sustainable golf. Some people are going to be kind of opposed to this, but when we pass a law, a rule, or regulation, it's passed to govern the least of us, not the best of us. And so if you can adopt something like they have in Florida and it becomes a requirement, then when if you're a golf course superintendent and you have a discussion with your general manager or greens committee, you have some legs to stand on, even though they may already walk the walk and want to do the right things. Now I have to do the right thing. Here, read
Yes.
this.
And that's, as I understand it, one of the reasons that in Europe things seem to be further ahead in terms of golf sustainability practices is that the regulatory environment is certainly more stringent there.
Yeah.
And based on my experience in other markets, what seems to happen is the regulatory environment is most stringent in Europe. It then gets adopted by California. And then once it's embedded in California, then it kind of works its way through the rest of the country. And I know there are some things going on in California now related to water management that may very well wind up becoming a standard in other parts of the country.
Well, that's a whole other topic. I mean, as you probably know, west of the Mississippi River in the United States, water is governed as a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's governed by the Bureau of Land Management. So you're given an allocation of water. And so when I worked out west all over the place out there, one of my things was water conservation. Well, guess what? Under the Western water law, if you don't use the allocation that you've been given, they reduce it the following year because you didn't use all of your allocation. Well, next year you might be in a drought. So there's actually disincentives to conserve water in the West. East of the Mississippi, the water is a public resource. and it's managed completely differently. So there's an example of one size does not fit all.
Sure, sure. Now, on that point, sticking with water for a minute, what do you see are really the biggest challenges that the industry is facing today from a sustainability standpoint?
Golf industry.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd say it's water. Um, More so some areas than other areas, but overall, I think it's water. Uh, some places like here and other places that I'm familiar with, we have more water sometimes than we need, but other places are in a drought. And then you put that on top of uh, they may have a water problem, but they're letting them build a whole bunch of houses out there. And then if golf courses can adapt to that and become wastewater management outfits where they use treated effluent to irrigate their golf courses, which is done in Phoenix and other places out there. There's another example of a positive role that a golf course can play for their community, even though they're probably letting too many people go there and build houses and live anyway, but they're doing what they're doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That I think that's an area where technology hopefully is going to play a role, because if they're away from a new technology or a new methodology to be able to do that wastewater treatment on a smaller scale in more localized communities, that's something that may have a positive impact on water use. I was actually surprised to learn that not all golf courses pay for their water. There are some courses that, if they're part of a municipality, there's no charge for it, and some courses are more sensitive to water use simply on a cost basis than others. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have golf courses here in this upstate New York area who actually uh, capture all of their water from the rain and put it in holding ponds, and that's what they use for irrigating their golf courses.
Yeah. What's I'm curious. You talk a lot about the importance of new development being at the site stage, right? Getting the right parcel of land. What's your take on whether there's been any improvement on that dimension over the last 20 years? Do you think people are being more conscious today in their site planning and acquisition around sustainability guidelines, or do you think it's still about maximizing the economic ROI of the any
Yeah,
given project?
yeah. I'd say overall it's still same old, same old,
Yeah,
and it's probably connected to the fact that many of these companies are publicly traded, and they're basically mandated by their shareholders to make a profit,
right.
and they see uh, most, in my opinion, most of the sustainability topic, other than the economic sustainability, as an expense rather than an economic opportunity. To me, that's one of the things that I have struggled with and thought about is uh, we actually incentivize from the federal government on down to the local doing things the wrong way. We don't incentivize doing things the right way because we haven't figured out how do you. I talked to a guy, actually a guy down in Florida years ago, and he owned thousands of acres of farmland. And I was at his farm and looking at all of his stuff. And I remember asking him, I forget how many generations this ranch had been in operation. He probably has passed on by now, but I said, how do you do this? How do you keep this thing going all these generations? And he said, we don't buy anything that rusts. They rode horses, they were old school, and uh, he said what they did was economize their ecological assets. That's what's lacking. We are not economizing the environment, and we don't really think about the cost associated with building a new wastewater treatment plant as opposed to building green infrastructure into existing golf courses or new planned developments, so that it actually saves millions of dollars over time, because you've economized your ecological assets based on where you're located.
Yeah. Well, Ron, based on and this is, I get it, and I definitely hear this because in other industries I've been involved with, there's a definite cycle, and that is early in adoption of sustainable business practices. The perception is being green is going to cost me money, and people eventually figure out a way to enhance their economic return by engaging in responsible environmental practices. And when being green means green, that's when you really see things take off. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And, you know, I hope over time at Golf Sustainability to really bring, you know, more of those practices. Like one thing that was mentioned in your book around implementing new technology that resonated with me from prior experiences, that often the initial upfront cost of deploying a new technology is considered as way too expensive. But when you look at the lifetime, like the life cycle price, or what's referred to in the energy industry as the total cost of ownership, when you look at the total cost of ownership of deploying a new technology, it often saves a tremendous amount of money. But that requires a shift in mindset, which, you know, does take time.
Yeah. That's why it's important to actually think about your members, your community, and so forth, because if you're going to try to do something that's different, a new technology or whatever it is, even if you're in business of developing a new technology, you have to have early adopters. And those early adopters can be case studies, can be spokespeople for what they've done. And eventually, if you do it the right way and time helps, more of those products get in the market. And as more products get in the market, the price can come down because you're selling more of the product, still making your profit. That's the whole thing. And that was another thing about you. In order to go down the sustainability path for golf or anybody, you have to go one step at a time. You can't. One of the problems with a lot of these real hardcore, avid environmental activists is they want everything tomorrow, and they don't think about, well, what is it like to actually walk the walk of a golf course superintendent and all the pressure they're under. You can't make them or suggest to them to do things that's going to cause them to have more meetings, maybe get a reprimand, maybe get fired, and then you're going to lose the person that you were actually working with. You got to take it one step at a time, but you got to keep your eye on the future, and you really have to have a plan, a real plan, and then try to stick to it.
So Ron, for a superintendent that's listening to this and recognizes that they've got a long way to go and they want to get started, what would your counsel, what would your advice be to someone who wanted to get started on their journey in golf sustainability at their course?
First thing I would do is I would identify all the areas that I could that golf is never played in, that I'm presently maintaining turf grass on. And maybe not in all those areas, but in some areas, I would develop a plan to develop some habitat for pollinators or whatever, I mean, even the worst golfer doesn't hit a golf shot backwards off a tee. So maybe there's some back areas behind tees that could be turned into a butterfly habitat. And then you got to have some signage so they don't think you just let the stuff go. Future pollinator garden or whatever. That's where I would start. I would start with that and just identify areas. The other thing that I've had a lot of interesting discussions with. I mean, I really, really, I like trees. I like forest and woods and so forth. But if you're going to maintain a sustainable golf course, what you want to do is reduce the amount of inputs you have to put into the turf grass.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an advocate for a tree inventory and finding out where you have trees over time that are blocking wind flow or putting too much shade on a golf green, and then thin those things out. Not for the purpose of making the turf grass wider, but for taking the pressure off the turf grass so you can reduce the amount of inputs that goes into it. That might not even be a second step, because that can cause it takes some education sometimes. I've seen a lot of golf courses say publicly, yes, we're going to have to take out some trees, but we're going to replace every tree with 2 more trees. Now that sounds really good if you're really into trees, but it might not be really good for turf grass.
And
so
there again, no one size fits all.
Right.
But so really kind of getting small wins, finding places to start small, show some progress, especially if it's accompanied with some cost reduction. So if you find some parts of your course that are currently being maintained where you can remove the costs associated with that maintenance, that's going to be an immediate cost savings. And you show that, and it maybe puts you in a better position, to take the next step. So that's some advice that really makes sense to me, Ron.
Yeah. And that's why we started out with nesting boxes.
Yeah.
You can put up wood duck boxes on ponds, or osprey nesting platforms, or bluebird houses, and you can even reach out to local scout groups and have scouts build the boxes for you, so there's no cost per box, and maybe even have an Eagle Scout project where they put the boxes up where you want them put up.
Right, and then that ties the community in, which is that social piece that I think is a real benefit. What industry groups out there today, Ron, do you think are doing the best job in supporting the notion of golf sustainability and providing resources for superintendents to advance sustainability at their courses?
Well, I would say the USGA has some information. They've changed a lot of their programming and stuff in the last 3 years. So I don't really know exactly what they're doing, other than the fact that they do have a group of agronomists that are out and about and doing site visits on golf courses and talking about the very things we're talking about tree management and shade and proper turf grass selection and management and maintenance facility stuff. So, and they have a lot of educational information on their website. So the USGA, I think, is a lead group. As far as superintendents are concerned, the GCSAA has a whole dedicated area, and they also have regional staff people that are working with golf courses directly. So I'd put those 2 groups up at the top of the list.
Okay, excellent. Well, Ron, we barely scratched the surface on your book, and certainly haven't even put a tiny scratch on the experience that you have to share. But I look forward to doing additional episodes of the podcast with you. I like to at the end of each episode, I always like to kind of do something that's going to help us get to know our guest a little better. So I've got some non-golf questions that I'd like to I'd like to pose to you. And for starters, what drives you? I mean, you've clearly been inspired initially by wildlife, but what drives you to still have as much energy and passion about this topic today as you had, decades ago when you were just getting started?
I'd say maybe two things. One is reading last year's report that there are about 70 million less birds in the North American continent than there was when I started my career as a wildlife biologist. And every bird and most other wildlife species, for that matter, and every ecosystem on the planet, including the oceans, are in serious decline. So part of me says, I didn't do a very good job. So I can't quit. I'm motivated to keep going because of we haven't accomplished what we need to accomplish. All you got to do is pay attention to the news and watch what's going on. And I try not to engage in the climate change debate. What I try to do is engage directly with people where they live, where they work, and where they play.
Mm-hmm.
Try about what it's like to be them, and try to think about what could I do to help make their lives easier to do the right things. What kind of people in positions of power could I have a effect on so they might start incentivizing doing the right things? And it's because of the state of the environment and what's going on around us. And the second thing is my 4 grandkids. And I think all the time about what kind of world are they inheriting, and what did I do to help make it as good as I could make it so they can do whatever it is whatever their life takes them towards, and feel like, well, I did everything that I can do. And I've written it down. I'm working on a little blog right now called My Audubon Adventures, to document some of the things I'm involved in, because I hope that one of these days my grandkids will get old enough that they might want to know what their grandpa did. So that's really that's it.
Well, and that's that sense of wanting to change the world and leave the world a better place is a common theme in kind of many that I talk to who have committed their careers to sustainability. And in the interest of making sure things are around for future generations, especially our own future generations, our kids and their kids and
Right.
and their kids. Who would you say has inspired you the most, Ron?
There's been a number of people that have inspired me. I would say, as it relates to golf, 2 people, not 3 people. My dad, and it was interesting. My dad was a policeman when I was a kid, and he was tough. We didn't really get along real well in my youth. Everybody liked him in the town. I grew up in an Andy Griffith Mayberry town in Indiana. I couldn't even understand why they liked him, because he was really hard on me. We became friends after I became an adult, and he actually apologized for some of the treatment he gave me. But anyway, the first thing that we did together was learn how to play golf. He didn't know how to play golf. I didn't know how to play golf. And as I said earlier, my dad suggested working with golf courses later in my life. But the second person sort of related to that is Arnold Palmer. Dad and I watched Arnold Palmer. We went to some of the golf tournaments that we could go to, and we watched Sam Snead, all those guys play golf. But Arnold Palmer was uh, a golf idol for me, and I was actually invited to Arnold's golf tournament down in Florida, and I went and met Arnold. Matter of fact, there may be a picture of me and Arnold in the book right there. I don't remember whether it's in that book or the book.
There is. He wrote the forward in here, which was interesting. And there are a couple pictures of you and him.
So I got to tell him while we were having a drink uh, what I just told you about my dad, who would have never thought about playing golf, but he thought Arnold Palmer seemed like a regular guy. If he can do this, I can do this. And so it was Arnold Palmer that motivated my dad and then me. And then I'm thankful I got to tell him that. And the third guy in golf that was really a motivator for me and a supporter and a friend is Jim Snow. Jim was the director of the green section of the USGA, and I first met him. He was the regional agronomist up here in New York State, and he became the direction of the green section about the same time that I launched the cooperative sanctuary program. He has since passed away, unfortunately, a young man, way younger than me. But Jim was so supportive and so motivating for me to stay the course and literally stay the course. That he was a really important person to me.
That's great. I love that story about you and your dad learning to play golf at the same time, and I see how that that would have left a very big impression on you. I like nothing more than going out and playing golf with my son, and we try to do that a couple times a year now that he's off on his own, and that's those are special, very special moments.
The golf we learned to play on was in Bicknell, Indiana. It had formerly been a cow pasture. They mowed it with a gang mower. The greens were sand. You had to drag a rug around behind you to get the mark out so the next players could play. And that's how we started.
That's great. What would you say is the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome in your career, Ron?
Oh boy. I would say probably every job I've had a lot of successes, but almost every time I found either while I was at a position or after I left a position, the mission, the ethic that I was trying to implant in the organizations that I actually ran they seemed to be about 5 miles wide and about an inch deep. So it's been somewhat frustrating to see my lack of talent and success at both embedding this walk in a walk part in places where I worked with, but also places that I managed after I was no longer there. That's been the most challenging and frustrating part. I think that's another reason why I'm still doing what I'm doing is I just feel like I haven't been overly successful yet, so I got to keep going.
Yeah. Well, listen, I respect and appreciate what you just said about your greatest challenge. I will tell you, I think you're being a little too hard on yourself because you've been a success. You've had a great impact, and I recognize it. It may not, you haven't changed the world entirely as a single man, but you've done great work, and I appreciate you. The last question that I would normally ask someone, which is kind of what would you like to leave behind for future generations? And rather than have you answer that, I'm going to read this very brief passage in the afterword of your book, Ron, that really made an impression on me, where you said, act as if the lives of your great grandkids depend on the actions you take today. You clearly embody those words by, what you've shared here with me in the last hour. And I think it's a great example for others to follow. And I can't wait to see what happens in your next book. And we're going to do another episode of this podcast when that bad boy comes out.
Okay, very good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, this has been great. Thank you, Ron Dodson. And you're really an inspiring individual. Appreciate you participating with Golf Sustainability. And thanks to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of Golf Sustainability. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player. You could also follow us on social media, where we have a presence on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So thanks for being with us today. Enjoy Golf Sustainability. And I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Have a great day.